Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ed Avis. I'm the Executive Director of the National Costumers Association, and I welcome you all to our webinar today. It's a pleasure to have a webinar on a lighter topic today about making masks for resale. Today's webinar is hosted by Linda Adams Foat, who is the owner of Camelot Costumes in Freeport, Illinois, and a past president of the NCA. We are grateful to have Linda here, she has a lot of experience on this topic, and I'm confident that you'll enjoy what she has to show us. Today's webinar will be recorded, so you can watch it again later if you'd like. It'll be posted on costumers.org. We encourage people to ask questions during the webinar. There's a questions tab on your GoToWebinar panel. If you don't see that, click the little orange arrow and then that will come down. And feel free to ask questions of Linda anytime during her presentation. And then at the appropriate moment, we will put those questions to her. When I switch the screen over to Linda, she will be using her webcam to make the presentation. And when you see her, if her image is small on your screen, you can make her window bigger by pulling down on a little tab at the bottom of her screen. So before we switch it over to Linda, I would like to show you one slide that contains the tools and the supplies that Linda recommends if you would like to make these kinds of masks. And I'll show this slide again at the end of the presentation. And of course, it will be on the recorded video too. So you don't need to try to scramble and write it all down. But this, if you look at this slide now, it gives you an idea of the tools and supplies that you need to make these masks. Okay, now I'm going to switch this over to Linda, and I just want to remind you, if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Hi, everybody. I'm hoping that you will be able to enjoy what I'm going to show you today. They are a lot of fun to make, and at least they're not surgical masks. There's something different to make for a while. Again, I want to talk about some of the things on the list. Make sure you have a big working surface and make sure you cover it with plastic. Do not cover it with newspaper or any kind of paper because it sticks to your mask and then you can have some adverse things happen. So make sure it's covered with a plastic. I just used an old dry cleaner bag, cut it apart and put it over this is my kitchen counter, and I put it over that so it just protects it a little bit. The other thing that you're going to need to protect your clothes is a smock or an apron because this can get kind of messy. And so it does, one of the qualities of Sculpt-A-Coat, the product we're using, is it permeates fabric. And so if you have on a nice top or nice clothes that you don't want ruined, you'd want to wear a smock or an apron. That's just to protect, and I'm kind of a messy crafter. I make lots of messes. In fact, I ruined my top yesterday because I'm practicing for this. So just something to cover yourself up. The other thing that you need to purchase or get ahead of time is Sculpt-A-Coat. Some of you are very familiar with this product. It's sold by Sculpture Arts or theater supply stores. It is a paste that actually can be watered down. And I do water it down just a little bit when I do this process because it's very thick and different application. You can use for props and everything, but it makes it very stiff. It's non-toxic. It won't hurt anything. You could eat it if you want to, but I don't know why you'd want to. But anyway, you could eat it. So that's the product that you need. The other thing you need is a blank mask. Now I use Domino's masks. I like this kind, the kind that's made in Italy. because they're formed, they have dimension. I don't know if you can see that, but there's curves for cheeks and your nose, your forehead, and I really like using these. Now my problem is I bought so many at one time. I have a whole bunch of them, but I'm getting low, and I called the supplier where I usually get them from, and they don't carry them anymore. I looked on Amazon and they're ridiculously expensive. I sell them in my store for $7.50, which means I paid what, $3.75 for them. They're selling them on Amazon for $20 a piece, just like this. So if any of you have good mask distributors, that's something I don't sell other than these. I don't sell masks in my store. And so if you have maybe Bar Pacific or Queso or some mask distributors, see if they have the blanks that I can line up, because I'm just about ready to buy the blanks. You can buy these foam ones at Joann's, and you'll see in a minute why I don't like them. But they're flatter, they don't have any dimension, and they're just not the quality, especially if you're going to spend or sell these masks for $50 or up. So you don't want to use these. You want to use these sculptural masks, and they're called domino masks. So the other thing you're going to want to do is take the elastic off. There's just little tabs here, so get that out of there because we're not going to use the elastic. We're going to put ribbons on them. So that is that. The other thing that you're going to need is to put something to put your Sculpt-A-Coat in. This is just a takeout container. Anything that is not special. Now you can wash it off, but this way I can just throw the stuff out. I can use a paper bowl. This is just a plastic container. You'll need a foam brush. You can use a regular brush. I just like the foam brush because that way they're cheap and I can throw them away. You're also going to need a good shears, but don't use your best shears because they're all going to get the Sculpt-A-Coat on them. Again, you can wipe it off. I just am weird about my best shears. I don't use my best shears on everything. You're going to need a nippers and a razor blade and an X-Acto knife. And those are the main things you're going to need right away. There's some other things you'll need. Oh, the other thing you're going to need are some kind of clips. I like these little paper clips, but you can also use these clips. Now, oh, that's fun. I threw it in the Sculpt-A-Coat. Just throw that in my hot soapy water. The other thing you're going to want is a small bucket of hot soapy water because your hands are going to get all gunky. Some people say, should I use rubber gloves? Well, you can. If you use rubber gloves, make sure that they're tight-fitting latex gloves. Don't use the loose-fitting ones that the caterers use because they'll just fall right off. I just use my hands because it does wash right off. You'll have a little residue on your hand. You can roll it off just like, remember in grade school, you put paste on your hand and you can roll it off. So that's kind of what it is. And it's non-toxic. It's not going to hurt anything. Later on, we'll talk about some of the other tools that you're going to need. But the other thing you're going to need is scraps of fabric that coordinate and a ribbon that goes with it and some trim. And those are all scraps. These are all things that I have in my store or in my sewing room. And you can go out and buy if you want to, but then it's adding to your cost. These are just leftover scraps that I have used. The other thing you'll need is a piece of felt. You can use the color of your mask. I either use black or beige most of the time. So anyway, let's get started on making a mask. So I have already started this one. I'm starting with a white domino mask, and this was a fabric. It was pink iridescent, and it was pink and orange. Now I put it over the white domino mask. So that's my first start. But I'm gonna do the second part just because it takes a while, and that's why I started one. So now I'm gonna take this piece of fabric. It's a piece of gold taffeta with pleats in it. And you're going to take, I'm gonna put a little bit of water in my Sculpt-A-Coat and stir it up just a little bit. You wanna be able, you want it fluid. And then you're going to take your fabric and you're gonna stick it in that Sculpt-A-Coat. And you're gonna cover it, just get it permeated. Then I take my fingers and I just kind of wipe it, squeegee it out between my fingers to get most of that out. But it's already through the fabric. It's really quick. You're going to do that. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to lightly coat your mask, just lightly with a light coat of it. This dries clear, so you don't have to worry about that. So the one thing you want to do is make sure you have the right side of the fabric out. And you're also going to want to make sure that you've cut your pieces on the bias, if possible, because if it's on the bias, it will contour over the contours of the mask. So I'm just laying this on the mask and I'm just rubbing this on into the contours of the mask. You'll see that? Any questions so far? Just rub it in really, really well. Now, here's where that bucket of nice warm soapy water is, because my hands are all full of goop. Just wash them off real quick, dry them just a little bit. And we're going to take that pair of scissors that I told you to have. And here's why you don't want to use your very, very best scissors, but they have to be sharp. So I'm going to flip this over like this. And I'm going to cut the edges. Now I'm going to leave about anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch edge. And you'll see why in just a minute. We're going to trim this so we don't have to work with all this stuff flopping around. Just going to trim that off. The other thing you're going to want to make sure that you have close is a wastebasket or someplace to dispose of this, because again, it makes a mess all over. So, and then you go in now and trim up anything that you don't want to see. I didn't want to see that little piece, so we're just going to rub it again. I've got this pretty well worked in. Can you see that? It looks white. It is white, but it will dry clear. I want to get on all the little contours of the mask. Then I'm going to take that little nippers and make sure that they're sharp. I like these. I'm going to cut a little more of this off. And I just make little nips. Now, if anybody who sews know that when you go around a curve, you have to do this or it won't lay flat. Can you see that? Am I close enough? I'm going to turn this around a little bit. Please tell me if there's any, if you can't see it, I can move the computer and maybe get a little closer. Okay, so now that I've done that, I just push them into the inside. Now you can do this with any kind of fabric. Now this is pretty lightweight fabric that I'm using, and it is easier with a lightweight fabric over a heavyweight fabric, but you can use a heavier weight fabric too. And they're not going to stay yet. I'm just pushing them in there. Get them going in the right direction to make sure I have enough. The reason we do this is then we're going to have a clean edge up at the top. And that's what you want. You want a nice clean edge. You don't want, even though it won't fray, you won't have raw edges of fabric. Now, what I've discovered is, see, that's laying down really nicely. But over here, it's being naughty. It's not laying down. So that's what I use these little clips for. I get it down there and I just clip it so it stays.
Linda,
Yes.
When you're at a good spot where you can stop for a second, we have a question, and
Okay.
that is, what does cutting on the bias mean?
Okay, I will show you in just a second. Let me get this little part done, and then I have a piece of fabric laying right across, just real close here, and I will show you. Every piece of fabric, unless it's a knits this does not apply to knits, but every piece of fabric has a bias, every woven piece of fabric. And fabric, even though if you just pull on it, doesn't stretch, it will on the bias. And that's why whenever you're making masks or hats or anything that goes around a contour, you want to take advantage of the bias. If you see some designer gowns, sometimes with big flowing skirts. You wonder how in the world do they do that? Well, it was cut on the bias. So let me wash my hands real quick or wipe my hands off, and I'll grab this fabric and I can show you what I mean. Here's the same fabric I just used. And if you pull on it, and that made the lighter of me. And nowadays there's stretch in just about everything. When you pull on it, it doesn't stretch side crossways or up and down. But if I go from corner to corner, all of a sudden that fabric stretches. That's the bias. So when you go from one corner of the fabric to the other corner of the fabric, that is the bias. Oh, I have a helper today. She didn't bother me at all yesterday when we were practicing, but no, she has to be here and helping. So that is the bias. And the bias is this tricky thing when you're sewing a costume. Most of them you don't want on the bias because then it stretches. But sometimes you do. You need it to contour body. If you're doing a really form-fitting dress, you want to use the bias. The other thing is when you make a bias dress, especially if it has a big skirt, you have to hang it for days because it will stretch. You can hem that thing and look tomorrow and it's all unhemmed. Now, when you take your fabric to cut that on the bias, make sure that you're not using the selvage edge. That's the finished edge that comes from the factory. You do not want to use that. One, it doesn't stretch. But two, it's just, you want either a torn or a raw cut edge on your mask. And you'll see as we progress why that happens, but it's just much better. And you can't get a true bias when you go use that selvage edge. So you want to use the bias. So you're going to lay your fabric at an angle. Does that answer your question? If not, let me know. I'll try a different way.
Linda, can you show what it means to cut on the bias?
Okay, I'll try. Again, if you take from one corner of the fabric to the opposite corner, not the one that's straight across, but the opposite end, and that corner is gone on this piece, but I can pretty much simulate it. You're gonna, if you had a pattern piece, let me see if I can find something to use as a pattern piece. Okay, I'm just gonna use this. This is just this piece of felt we're gonna use later. And if I wanted to cut on the bias, I would take that piece and lay it on this stretchy part. Does that make sense? And if a pattern, if you're using a commercial pattern, they will tell you cut on a bias if it needs to be cut on the bias. So I think that might be another seminar to do or webinar is cutting patterns, but that's basically, you want to cut it on that stretchy part.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
All right, so here we've got our mask. We've got our raw fabric on there, and you can use 2 fabrics, 3 fabrics, 4 fabrics. You're going to see, I have some finished ones that I've made over the years that I actually made to go with specific costumes in my shop that I didn't sell. But you can see that sometimes I use 2 fabrics, sometimes I use 3 fabrics. But this is basically what it's going to look like. You're going to clip it and you're going to set it aside and let it dry before you move on to the next step. But because of this webinar, I have made a mask that's ready for the next step. But we'll cut out this eye later. Whoops, I do want to do one thing while it's still fairly flexible. I want to take a razor blade and I'm going to cut just a little hole in that where that eye is, so I can get my scissors in there and cut around that eye hole. That makes sense? There's a little hole there. So again, just work it on down, make sure it's all nice and stuck. And I'll set that aside. So back to my bucket of nice warm water to get everything clear. I do wipe off my nippers and I wipe off my scissors pretty soon. I don't want that stuff drying on there. And then I do, when we're all done, when I'm all done with this today, I'll take a little bit of sewing machine oil and oil my scissors and my nippers so they don't get rusty. But for right now, this is good. Okay, so here's our next step. And there's two ways to do this. I prefer to do it. I hope I turned it on. Oh no, I didn't. This is a mask, a blank that I use, and this is using that foam one from Joann's. As you can see, it doesn't have the depth or the dimension that the Italian one. Whoops, I got to see a couple places over here. I got to put clips on or I'm not going to have it stuck down. So I want to. One thing I want to say about the clips, you can use clothespins, but if you use clothespins, make sure you use the plastic ones. I actually pretty much ruined one of these masks because I used wood ones, and the wood kind of stuck to the mask. Now I am trying to resurrect it, and you'll see later, I'll point it out. But there are ways to save things. I always say there's no mistakes, there's just happy accidents. And we make it a design element is what we do. And I'll show you one of those design elements that what happened yesterday when I was talking to Ed and kind of practicing a little bit. So here I have a blank mask. And what I want to do, you see it? I've used 3 different fabrics on it. And I have some trim. This is just scraps. I never throw scraps of trim away, especially metallic trims, because I can use them for this. And I'm not a huge keeper. I don't keep every piece of fabric. If it's a common fabric, I just don't have space. But if it's a special fabric or something I really like, then I will keep smaller pieces just for something like this or to repair a costume. So I have taken some scrap trim and I kind of pre-cut it first. Can you see this? If I lay it here on the, no you can't. Okay, I took this and I cut pieces of the trim and I'm going to put it right on where my 2 fabrics come together. We're going to cover up that seam with trim. And how we do that is I pre-cut it and I always make it longer than the spot I'm using because we have to have some to wrap around. So I just want to make sure that works. So what this does is it covers up your seam, but it also highlights features of your mask. So there's 2 ways you can do that. You can do it with Sculpt-A-Coat, but Sculpt-A-Coat is kind of messy. It will stick. It will stick forever unless you get it wet. But you saw it's kind of a messy process and it also takes longer. If you use a hot glue gun, it goes really fast and you can do this pretty quickly. So let's see if my hot glue gun is ready. The other thing, when you use a hot glue gun, you always want to make sure that you have a cup of ice water. And you say, why? And the other thing you want is a skewer or an old pencil or something, because this is hot. And I have learned the hard way that when you touch this, you burn yourself. I did one project very early in my career where everything had to be hot glued. It was a very last minute costume. I had to have a lizard in less than 24 hours. And so therefore I hot glued all the scales on. I had no fingerprints for a while. So it's very hot. So that way, if you would get the glue, because I forget and I just stick my fingers in there and it cools off instantly. So that's why you have the ice water. So what I do is I take my hot glue and I run a bead along that seam. And I take my trim and I lay it down there and I let it hang over the both ends because I want that to be able to wrap under. And I just tap that down with my skewer. Or if you're brave, you can use your fingers. And a lot of times if I cool them off, I can use my fingers this way. I'm a very tactile person. I really like to use my fingers. And so that's why I learned the hard way. So we're going to do that on both sides. You can use the same trim. You can use different trims, whatever you happen to have, as long as it coordinates. So I'm putting this one here. You take your skewer, and you tap, 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 get that down. Now you go on the back side. You can see where I've got all those little clips and curves. I put that on the inside because we're going to cover that. You won't see it. And you're going to take and just put a little hot glue at the ends down here so you can wrap this trim underneath. You want to use trim that's the appropriate size for your project. These are relatively small, so you're not going to want to use huge trim on it. So you'll keep the smaller trims for this and save your bigger trims for other projects. So I just put a little bit of glue there, and we're going to get those top ones. So any questions so far? I'll be happy to answer them.
Linda, we have one other question. It looks like it's coming from your fan club.
Oh, okay.
It says, why are you so awesome, Mima? Love, Maggie and Lily. Don't know if you can answer that one, but.
Those are my granddaughters. I invited them to watch because they're all shut in too. So now the next thing you do is you take another piece of trim. I usually do a contrasting trim. We're going to put it around the outside edge. Okay. I always start in this left-hand side about partway down. And you do want to make sure it's trimmed off nicely. And I pre-cut this too. I kind of measured it. And so I'm going to just start putting some hot glue around there. So in other words, hi girls, I love you. So just put it around again. Make sure that you don't touch that hot glue with your fingers. It becomes very painful. And you'll have a new identity with no fingerprints for a while. So. This will take just a minute, and then we want to do one more thing on this mask, and then we're going to move on while this dries to another mask and another step. I hope you're all well and doing the best you can in all of this kind of situation. Maybe this will give you a little something to do while we're all shut in. Now, I had an email last week. See, that's why I have water there. I just touched that glue. From the manufacturers of Wonderflex and Armoflex. That is another product that becomes stiff after it's wet, after you wet it down, and you can shape it to make lots of shapes. And they said, well, could you make a mask out of that? I said, yes, you can. Problem is I didn't have any on hand, and it wasn't time to order any. Now they're sending me some, but it's not arriving till tomorrow. So therefore I told them I would mention it. The only thing with the Wonderflex is it's flat, and you would need something to mold it over. So you'd have to mold it over your face or a styrofoam head, or even one of these domino masks that I have here. So once you get to back where you started, you're going to trim that just a little past. You're going to touch that with some glue so it doesn't fray. So now you have another look for this mask. I should go over my, let's do this over my, you can see the eye hole. All right. And the last thing we want to do with this glue, and you can do this with the sculpted coat, and I think on the one mask we're going to do it with the sculpted coat, but you can take a little bit of hot glue and put it over where the holes were on the mask. And you're going to take a coordinating ribbon about 18 inches long, and you're just going to lay it there. Make sure you use your pencil or stick. The reason why we want to use that hole is because it's a guidepost. We know that's the right place. That's where the manufacturer had put that hole. So we're just going to place this on here and we're going to set it aside. So now we have our mask trimmed and we have the ribbons on it. So that's step 2. Now we're going to go to step 3. Wrong mask. Then why is this done? Okay, so here's step 3. This one, I put the ribbons in with the Sculpt-A-Coat. And like I say, you can do it with the hot glue, you can do it with the Sculpt-A-Coat. This mask is all ready to go. And what I've done is you can do it either way. You can put just a square of fabric behind here, and push it in and Sculpt-A-Coat it in, or you can pre-trim it. Now, that's probably the worst part about this job is the trimming it, because it's, you know, also I'm getting older and my hands aren't as flexible as they used to be. So what I did is I put this my felt, and I used to use felt. It's soft. Don't use a wool felt because some people are allergic to wool, but just, you know, a polyester felt that you pick up at Joann's. Like I said, I use black or I use beige, or if I just happen to have the right color in my stock, I'll use that. So I got my mask pre-trimmed here. And I'll show you how to do that. Because otherwise you can glue it in there with your Sculpt-A-Coat and then trim it. The only thing you need to watch when you're trimming, let me get this in here squarely, is to not cut your ribbons. Because guess who's done that? Me. I'm just sometimes not as careful as I should be. Okay, so I'm going to finish trimming this mask, and you want to go behind your trim. Give it a little extra. Don't go too far down because it gives you a little room. And then when you get to the ribbons, make sure you go behind the ribbon. Don't cut your ribbon off. So now what I'm going to do, and I haven't done the eyes. I'm going to just put slits there, and I'll have to go in later and trim those eyes. So I'm going to take some of the Sculpt-A-Coat, and I'm just going to paint the inside of this with the Sculpt-A-Coat. Now this Sculpt-A-Coat is great stuff. You can use it to make props, tree trunks, you know, for if you do some theater. It's kind of cool stuff. You can actually paint it if you need color. You can add pigment to it and have the color right in the Sculpt-A-Coat. So I've got my mask coated on the inside, and what I'm going to do, I want to make sure I got the right side, is I'm going to paint the felt with the Sculpt-A-Coat too. And make sure you get right to the edges because that's the most important part. You could go in with glue later, but why? If we can get it on there really well, we're going to do that. So this is a little bit different approach. Before we soak that glue up into the fabric, this time I don't want that because it makes fabric hard. I mean, it's like a shell. You notice here, it's hard. So I don't want that on the inside where their faces are. So then I just lay this on here. I line it up as best I can. If I have to go back in and trim, that's fine. Not a problem. But I cover up that inside and I make sure that I mold all those contours in there. Like that. And then I will take, you see it's not perfect, there's some sticking out, that's okay. I can go back in and trim it. But I got the hardest part done. So what I want to do is I want to take these clips and clip it again so it stays together. Maybe. And so that's what you're going to do. Now the reason why I said use plastic clips or even plastic clothespins or clamps like this or those metal paper clip things is because what I discovered when I was making this mask, I tried a different product. I tried, this is fabric, this is fabric, this is paper. It had a musical staff on it. And I wanted, oh, that's a cool pattern. I want to try that. Well, it worked great. It contoured great, all that kind of stuff. But the paper clips, or the wooden clothespins stuck. And so if you look right here, there's a big white spot where it pulled the paper off. So now, and it did it here. So now I have to be creative and make that a design element. So what I'll do is I'll go in later with some glitter glue or some paint and paint that, and no one will ever know. But if I can do it without getting that, that's great. So we're just going to clip that. You'll tell me if I'm sticking my tongue out, won't you? I'm one of those people that stick my tongue out when I'm concentrating. So anyway, you just, again, set this aside and let it dry. So now we're on to the final step. And that's kind of fun. So, okay, so here's the next mask. This has the felt on it already, and I've cut out the eyes. That's probably the hardest part, is to cut out the eyes. And sometimes when you're trimming this, you want to trim it from the inside, you can see where the edge is. But again, I put the ribbon on with the Sculpt-A-Coat rather than hot glue. This one, an example of, whoops, I made a mistake, but you can't really tell it anymore unless you really, really look. Yesterday, when I was talking to Ed, I had just done this mask. And I reached over to move the computer and I touched my arm to the glitter glue, because that's just glitter glue. And I smashed it and smeared it around. So what I did is I took spray glitter and just sprayed the whole thing with a little spray glitter. Gives it a nice sparkly look, and it just covers up some of those little sins. Now this one I used little gem trim, and I again went around the edges. So now what we have to do is decorate this mask. This brown one that we just did, put the back on, I'm going to make this a man's mask. So I'm not going to trim it in any way with feathers or flowers or anything like that. What I am going to do is I'm going to take maybe, because you do have this little bump here where your trims meet, maybe put a button here, a decorative button or something. And I probably would balance it out and put it on both sides, but that it's going to be a male mask, so therefore I'm not going to decorate it up any further.
Linda, before you go to the decoration step, we do have another question, and
Sure.
you mentioned this, and that is the eyes. Can you show how you trim the eyes out?
Sure. Remember back here, we took a razor blade to this eye, that very first one. I took a razor blade while it was still wet and trimmed and put it in there. So what I do is I get into that spot and I start snipping, and I do that little snip thing that we did around the edges because it's a curved surface. And then I just go in and clip. I don't fold it over. Felt does not fray. Wouldn't fray anyway, but I just get in there and just clip, 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 little small clips. And I usually have to go around 2 or 3 times to get it all. But that's basically how you trim that. Or if you'd rather use a small nippers, you can do that too. But down the inside of your mask will be all nice and tidy, clean, finished, and it's soft. So your client won't have anything hard against their face. And they really appreciate that. So this mask is a midnight blue with different shades of midnight blue. I'm gonna clean up a little bit. I got Sculpt-A-Coat on my work surface, get rid of that. And now here's where you're gonna need some extra things. These again are optional. The other thing I keep with me all the time is an old towel, because after I wipe my, get my hands wet as a towel. So, and a trash can. I have a trash can right here, because all those little pieces of that wet Sculpt-A-Coat fabric goes right in here. If I lay it here, it's going to stick to something, and I just want to get rid of it. So, and I want to get rid of all the stuff. So you have a clean work surface because it will pick up everything. So now I have this mask and I want to make this a fancy mask. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do, I went through I have a stash of feathers and I found some feathers. Now the thing you have to remember is scale. These are small, so you don't want to get them too big. Although I have some over here, I'm going to show you that I've made that are huge. But so this is a tie-on mask, and we don't want them really big on a tie-on mask. So I picked up some feathers. There's some coke feathers, some peacock feathers, and I just made this little bunch. I took some fabric. Well, I took actually a bread tie and wrapped it around there so it would hold. I did it nice and tight, and then I took some thread and wound around it and then knotted it a couple of times, and I took the bread tie off. Then I trimmed off the edges so they're nice and even. Again, this is why you want a sharp scissors, but not your best scissors. And what I'm going to do is right here, where the trim meets, right there, that's halfway. I'm going to take that, take a look at it. Is that where I want it? I think so. And I'm going to take my hot glue gun. Just put a little bit there. You don't have to overdo it. Because we're going to put more on. And you're going to situate your feathers where you want them. And make sure you use your stick because, again, it can be very hot. So it doesn't have to be, you see a little bit of the white from the feather. Don't worry about it because we're going to cover that all up. Got a piece of my string that I tied, or thread that I. So that's going to stick there. Now the other thing I did is I went through my ribbon stash and I found some ribbon that kind of coordinates. It's kind of a peacocky, it's an iridescent, it's turquoise and purple and blue. And so I liked it and I just made a little bow. And so I take my hot glue and I put that on there. A little bigger glob this time. That's why you don't have to do a big glob right away because you're going to keep adding. And you're going to find the side of the bow that you like and you're going to put it on there and just push it in there. So you see that. The other thing I did is I took my glitter glue and I went around the eyes. And this one had some squares, some diamonds in the fabric that you couldn't see after I got it on here. So I took the glitter glue and I highlighted those lines. And so you can do a lot with glitter glue, and you'll see that on some of the other ones I did that you can see that. So now I have a feather and a bow, but it needs one more thing. So I don't know if you do it, but I do this. Whenever I have a piece of jewelry that is broken, or a single earring, or a brooch, a fun brooch, I have a bin that a box, a little plastic shoebox that I keep mismatched jewelry or odds and ends or some really cool jewelry. So I went in that box and I found this pin. And so I'm going to take that pin, and we took the back off the pin, just took a side cutters and took the back off so we didn't have anything in the way. And we're going to hot glue that and put it right there. So here's our third hot glue. And I think it looked more interesting this way. So, and there we have it. It's all done. Just let it cool off a little bit and you have a mask. Now let me put it up to my face so you can see what it's going to look like. So that is a completed mask after you get the decoration. And you can decorate them any way you want to. Just remember to, if you're going to sell these, to be conscious. You want them in colors that people are going to use. If you like them, probably someone else is going to like them. So anyway, I'm trying to get this straight. So that is a completed mask. Any questions before I show you some more masks?
Hi, Linda. Yes, we do have a couple other questions. One is, how long does it generally take to fully dry when you are initially putting on your fabric?
It takes a few hours. However, you can speed up the process if you have a hair dryer. It can go faster. But it's still not, it takes a little bit. You can't, and that's why I did it ahead, because you can't really do it and move on to the next step. It has to be dry before you add the rest of the trim and everything else, so you can handle it. But it takes a good couple of hours. It's not totally dry, but you can handle it after a couple of hours. So I went in and finished the eye holes with some glitter glue. I took some little glitter spray and just sprayed that. It covered up my little boo-boo that I did, put a little sparkle in the feathers, and that's it. It's done.
Okay, Linda, another question. When I had asked you about trimming out the eye hole, the attendee came back and said that what she really wants to know is, do you decorate around the eye opening? And you showed that you do that with some glitter glue, but are there any other ideas on decorating around the eyes?
You could use puff paint or any kind of paint that you wanted to, but I usually use the glitter glue, and because it covers up any little imperfections that you may have made, because it's very tough to cut in those eye holes, and if you don't get them perfect, it kind of people don't notice it. So anyway, that's finished. You can always hit it with a little glitter, and it makes it sparkly. And this is something, you know, every time I do one, I try something different, and it's just a learning curve. This time I did a dimensional trim. I did some rhinestone beading, and I did the wrap around the back. I would not do that again with the rhinestone because it's too thick. In fact, I went in and trimmed some of that out with a side cutter before we started today. So just keep in mind what you're using. And like to say, the masks I want to show you now are masks that I've made for other projects. You can make them male or female. Of course, the males you don't decorate quite as much unless they request that you do that. Here's another thing you can do. You can put them on a stick. This one's on a stick. Then you do it slightly different. You do not put the ribbons on. You go ahead and get the mask completed as far as putting the back on. And then you take die cutters and you cut little 3/4 inch holes, and they have to be at least 1.5 inches apart. Then you take a 1/4 inch, 3/8 or 1/4 inch dowel rod. I just took some ribbon and wrapped it around there, put some ribbon, left them hang at the bottom. And then the top of that is buried underneath this little nest of decoration. So that's another thing. You can do them on a stick. I have found more and more young people today don't want them on a stick. They want them on their face. They don't want to deal with this. They're afraid they're going to leave it someplace or drop it or break it. So, but it's your customer's preference. Here's the male that goes with that one. These are for costumes in my shop. I've used for a showcase one year, and they were carnival costumes. And so this was the male and this was the female, but they match. Now, if you can see on this one, I used 3 different fabrics. I used that diamond shaped stuff here, a different one here, and a different one here. They were all costumes, fabrics used in the costume. So you can use more than one. You can do different shapes and different sizes. And then you can see I went in, there was a print or a pattern in the fabric, and I went in and highlighted that. This was clear glitter glue and this was gold glitter glue. And but again, you can see I finished off the eyes with the glitter glue. And it just, now this brown one, that's a man. This one's a man, and I use the glitter glue, but if you don't want to use glitter glue, you could use a brown or a different colored puff paint. I would use that around the eye. So this was a couple, and they go to a costume in my store. This one is on a short stick on purpose. The person wanted it on a short stick. It's my Cinderella mask, goes with my Cinderella costume, and that's just the way they wanted it. This particular customer wanted it, and they didn't buy it, they were just renting the costume. And I just finished it on the inside like that. And it's also on a short stick. They didn't want a long stick. They wanted something they could just go like that. So this was, everything's backwards in the picture. So anyway, that's a Cinderella mask. This one you can see I used a dimensional trim, and that's cool too. I used that daisy stuff, and it was really cool. I like that. It was appropriate. And this was just a piece of applique that I put on over top of the fabric, and that was just put on with Sculpticoat. Here's another one that goes with one of the costumes in my shop. This one is really cool. It's a woman's mask. It's on ribbon, and it just was different fabrics and different combinations that I used around it. I have actually made 2 of these. I had a customer come in and fell in love with it, and it really goes with my costume, and she wanted one, so I made her one. It was almost identical, and she was more than willing to pay me $50 for it. And it was all scrap. I mean, the base is, you know, I have the Sculpticoat. That's lasted me for years, so it's basically just the mask and my time. And so she paid me $50 and was happy as a clam. She framed hers, and then I have mine for the shop. And I have one last one. This one's also on a stick. It's pink, and this was a sheer fabric, and this one has a big over here. And you see, I tend to put the big things on a stick. I don't know why. I can't answer that question, but it's just looks really cool. Again, if you're going to use a stick, you want to use 3/8 or 1/4 inch dowel rod, trim to the length you want it. You put the 2 holes in the back. This one's more like 2 inches apart. I'd say 1.5 inches is the minimum. You have to put at least 2. And I use the 1/4 inch die cutter for my grommets when I use 1/4 inch grommets as how I cut those, because this is tough. It's hard now. So it takes a lot to cut those. So then the top of my stick is decorated to hide all that. So the bottom is decorated. And this one, I don't know if you can see it, if I can get it close enough. I took a lot of glitter glue and made patterns. It was a plain fabric, not much on it. And I put designs on it, swirls and squiggles. And this we just did glitter glue. So yeah, this was just some other ones. So any questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple other questions and comments.
Sure.
One is, you mentioned that you sold that one mask for $50, and obviously prices depend on the market and what you're making, but can you give us a little bit of a range of prices that you sell or rent the masks?
Sell them anywhere from $50 up to $100. It depends on what they're made of, how much time it takes to make them. That $50 one was my first one. You know how you make the first one, you don't always get the amount of money that you should for them. But it depends on your market. I could not go above $100 in my market, not where I live. But if you lived in a bigger market, you know, I live in a very small town. If you lived in a bigger market, you might be able to get way more for that. And on the internet, if you sold them on the internet, you would probably get more. But you'd have to do a really quality job. You can't do a shoddy job, because if you get one bad review, you're done. So just make sure that if you make a mistake, then make it a design element and call it okay. So I could not sell this mask right now with this on here, with these white spots where the paper pulled up from those wooden clothespins. So I will have to think of something that I can do to go back in there and fix that. Maybe another row of trim. I don't know, but it's going to have to be something so I can sell this mask. Let's see if I can trim these eyes out while we're here.
Linda, while you're doing that, let me ask another question. This is from an attendee who says, I see that Sculpticoat is a name brand. Have you tried any other brands that do the same thing?
No. I just figure I go with the best. I didn't know of, actually, I don't know of any other brands that do this same thing. I've had this for years. I have to say I've had this bucket for probably at least 10 years. So I've had it a very long time. It lasts forever. Unless you leave the lid off of it, it really doesn't go bad. So I think I paid at the time $50 for it. And that, yeah, it's a gallon, or it's probably a gallon, and I paid $50 for it. But when I consider how long that has lasted, to me, that's not it's a deal. And it's one of those things, when you find something that works, I don't want to spend even $25 on something that might be less expensive and it doesn't work. And then I have to go back and buy my $50 Sculpey Coat. And that, again, it's probably not $50 anymore because it was a long time ago that I bought this. So what I do as I'm trimming these eyes, I just go in and just slowly clip, clip, clip as I can get in there. Right now there's all these clips on there, so that makes it a little more difficult. And I just go in and clip, 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 little clips. And that's why sometimes this little clippers is better. And you just get as close to the edge as you can. So, you know, I'll have to go in and work on that some more. Sometimes if you work on it from the back side, it works better. Still kind of wet, so I'm trying not to disturb the. The thing, you do kind of want to get these out of here before they get too stiff, because they get very stiff. This gets stiff and it's harder to cut. But again, I go in and make those little clips, and then I can get in there and do little tiny sections at a time. It takes a little time. But start to finish, if you didn't have to wait for dry time, I'm quite honestly don't know how long we've been, but it would take an hour or less to make it if you don't count dry time. And you do have to let it sit and dry. And it depends on your skill level. Some people have higher craft skill levels than others. And how careful you are. You do want to be very careful not to clip your ribbon. I almost clipped my ribbon, and that would have been not made me happy. So, there it is almost. I'll still have to go back in and trim it up a little bit. But that's probably the worst part, is trimming the eyeballs out.
Okay, Linda, we have a couple comments here. One is, that looks beautiful. And this was referring to the Cinderella mask.
Okay.
And here's a comment from an attendee who says, thanks for your much needed information and inspiration at this crucial time. It was uplifting. Thanks, Linda. Can't wait to try it.
Okay, well, good. I'm hoping you take the time. I've often wondered, somebody asked that question about Sculpey Coat, have I tried anything else? It really looks and smells like Elmer's glue paste. It really does. But I don't know if Elmer's glue paste would get this hard. I really don't. That's why I stick to it. When you find a good thing, you stick to it. And so that's why I do. But anyway, if you do make a mistake or like something like this, just get creative, find some way to cover it up. I'm going to find something. I will. That way I can put it out for sale and somebody might want to buy this as a man's mask. But I wanted to try the paper, and the paper does work, but just don't put a clip on it. And it stays pretty well on the back side, so just don't put a clip on it because it's sticky. It's glue, and then they stick to it, especially if it's a wooden clothespin, because underneath this trim here, you would see little pieces of wood that came off the clothespin. But that's hidden underneath the trim. And so like I say, don't throw away broken jewelry, mismatched earrings, anything like that. Of course, we all hoard our feathers and our trim. Unless they're this long, unless they're an inch long, I keep all my trims. I keep anything that's 6 inches or longer because I can always use them on one of these. Not on the outside so much, but on these shorter pieces. And be creative. You can put 3 fabrics in here. You can put another one here. I just, for time's sake, for speed, I just kept it to 2 and 3. But I hope you enjoyed it. I had fun.
All right, thank you very much, Linda. That was wonderful and inspiring, and I know that our attendees enjoyed it. Attendees, if you have any other questions, feel free to submit them. In the meantime, I'm going to switch back to the screen to that slide, which shows the supplies that Linda recommends.
Okay, make sure to clean your scissors and your nippers and oil them when you're done.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, I'm going to leave that up there just for a minute. But remember that slide, that this webinar has been recorded, so you can check this out on the costumers.org website. Speaking of which, if you're not regularly looking at that website, please do. There's tons of good info on there. There are many articles in the last 2 weeks only about coronavirus and the government's help in that regard and ideas on how to survive it. So please, and what I mean by survive it, I mean how your shop can survive it. So please, if you aren't looking at that website, please take some time to do that. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope you sign up for our future webinars. And thank you again, Linda, for your time today. It's greatly appreciated. And that's going to end our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.